He was banned from fighting, called a traitor, and humiliated before the world. But when he returned, it wasn't just a fight, it was a rebirth, and the entire planet stopped to watch. Muhammad Ali was no longer just a boxer, he had become a symbol, a man who dared to say no to war, who stood up to the US government, lost his right to fight, and saw his career frozen in its prime. While others collected titles, Ali collected accusations, debts, and an endless wait. For 3 years, the man who said "I'm the greatest" was prevented from proving it in the ring. For many, he was already finished. For others, it was only a matter of time before the world forgot him. But Ali had something no court could take away: his voice. He spoke at universities, in town squares, on television shows. His tongue remained sharp, his presence incendiary, his spirit indestructible. But one question lingered: could the body keep up with the mind? Could Ali, after so long inactive, return to face the brutality of a professional ring? And then came the announcement that set newspapers, radio stations, and television stations ablaze: the fight against Joe Frazier, the undefeated champion, the man who never backed down. It wouldn't be just a boxing match. It would be the definitive proof of who the true heavyweight king was. The press called it the fight of the century. On one side, the hero who never lost, the relentless champion. On the other, the exile, crying out for redemption. When night fell, Madison Square Garden became the center of the planet. More than 300 million people around the world watched every punch, every breath, every fall. In that ring there were more than just a fighter's honor, courage, and the very history of the sport were at stake. But this wasn't just a sporting battle. It was the beginning of an epic war that would transform Ali into something greater than he could have imagined. A man capable of falling, bleeding, being defeated, and still being reborn before the world. The bell echoed in Madison Square Garden, and for a moment, the entire world held its breath. Muhammad Ali stepped onto the stage as if stepping onto a sacred stage, not just to fight, but to prove he was still worthy of being called the greatest. The cameras followed him, the crowd chanted his name, and even those who hated him couldn't take their eyes off him. His body seemed heavier than before, his reflexes perhaps not as sharp, but his gaze, Ali's gaze, burned as if he had carried 3 years of silence within him. On the other side, Joe Frazier waited like a wall of muscle, cold, focused, almost motionless. He wasn't a showman. He didn't dance. He didn't provoke with sharp words. His response always came with his fists. Frazier believed Ali had lost the right to proclaim himself king. He was the undisputed champion, the man who carried the belt. And now, in that ring, he was determined to make that clear to everyone. The first round began with Ali displaying his old weapon: speed. His feet glided, his hands firing jabs that felt like arrows slicing through the air. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. The phrase he had repeated so many times wasn't just poetry, it was strategy. He tried to maintain distance, impose rhythm, remind everyone that he still had magic in his fists. The audience was divided between delirium and doubt, but it soon became clear the years of separation had taken their toll. His movements were brilliant, but less consistent. Frazier advanced like a tank, blocking blows, closing the distance, and every time he connected, the impact was brutal. "You're not going to beat me, Ali," Frazier roared through gritted teeth between clinches. Ali responded sarcastically, even as he felt the crushing force of each blow. "Is that all you've got? You'll need more than that to stop me," he taunted, trying to maintain his aura of invincibility. The crowd went wild. The fight wasn't just technical, it was theater, it was war. 2 worlds colliding every second round. After round, the stakes went beyond the title. It was dignity. It was survival. Ali took a beating, but he wouldn't give in. His head shook, his eyes burned, his body felt every blow, but his mouth never shut. He kept talking, mocking, defying, as if pride were a stronger shield than his muscles. But Frazier didn't smile. Every time he unleashed his left hook, devastating, precise, deadly, Madison Square Garden shook. And then, in the 11th round, the scene that paralyzed the planet unfolded. Frazier's uppercut connected with Ali's face with the force of a train. Ali's body collapsed onto the ring, heavy, slow, as if falling in slow motion. Silence fell over the arena. It was like watching a legend being torn from his pedestal in front of millions of eyes. But, against all odds, Ali rose. Not in a hurry, not arrogantly. He hobbled to his feet, panting, but looking at Frazier as if to say, "You can knock me down, but you can never beat me." At that moment, the audience understood that this was no ordinary fight. It was the return of a man who had lost everything but refused to give in. It was the rebirth of someone who carried on his shoulders not just the weight of a belt, but the weight of history itself. And as Ali stood up after that monstrous blow, a question echoed in the heart of every spectator. If he could take this, how far was he willing to go? The 12th round began as if it were a new fight. Ali, even shaken by Frazier's devastating hook, returned to the center of the ring with fierce pride. He was no longer the same light-footed boy who had danced for 15 rounds without losing his breath. Now, every step felt heavy with lead, but his soul refused to retreat. He raised his guard, threw quick combinations, and with every jab, he shouted to the world, "I'm still here." On the other side, Frazier, standing as firm as a wall, seemed impassive. His every punch was an earthquake, each attack a reminder that this was no ordinary opponent. This was a champion in his prime. The audience was divided. Some saw in Frazier pure brutality, a fist that didn't hesitate, a body trained for absolute endurance. Others saw in Ali the flame of rebellion, the man who refused to accept fate and rose even when everything conspired against him. He was more than boxing. He was politics. He was culture. He was the clash of ideas. Frazier represented discipline, silent work, brute force. Ali represented voice, spectacle, the fight against the system. And in that ring, these two worlds collided every second. In the following rounds, Ali tried to recall the past. He leaned against the rope, taunted, smiled with bloodied lips, and grimaced to show that nothing was harming him. But everyone knew. It was an act. His body ached. His eyes betrayed the pain. Still, his mouth wouldn't shut. "Is that all, Joe? You'll tire before you knock me out," he shouted, even as he felt his kidneys burn with each brutal blow. It was as if Ali used words to survive. If his body couldn't take it, his tongue kept the myth alive. Frazier, however, wouldn't be swayed by the psychological game. His strategy was clear: resist, advance, punish. Every left hook seemed to rip out Ali's soul. In the 14th round, the scene was almost poetic. Ali, leaning against the rope, absorbed body punches while responding with fragile jabs and a crooked smile, almost defying death itself. "I'm the greatest," he yelled, spitting blood. The crowd roared. This was no longer sport. It was sacrifice. It was faith. The fight progressed like a relentless war. No one backed down. Ali no longer seemed to be fighting just Frazier. He was fighting against the lost years, against prejudice, against the government that called him a traitor. Every punch he took was also a punch against the memory of everything taken from him, and yet he remained standing. Frazier, for his part, seemed to be fighting against the shadow of the myth. Beating Ali wasn't just winning a fight, it was destroying the legend that insisted on surviving. And then came the 15th round, the last. Both were exhausted, breathing like wounded beasts. With every second, Madison Square Garden seemed to transform into a cauldron of madness. Ali, staggering, raised his fists and shouted, "Nobody can stop me." Frazier, his face swollen, responded with another monstrous uppercut. It was the image of war. Two men fighting not just for a title, but for eternity. Joe Frazier, winner by unanimous decision. The champion walked out with his arm raised, and Ali, defeated, left the ring with his head held high. He had lost the fight, but he had regained something much greater, the respect of the world. The defeat didn't erase the legend, it only strengthened it, because everyone who watched knew Ali still had much to offer. And it was at that point, amidst pain and defeat, that the certainty was born. Muhammad Ali hadn't returned just to fight. He had returned to prove he could be reborn as many times as necessary. If you also believe that Ali showed more greatness in this defeat than many in their victories, leave your like, subscribe to the channel and comment below. What was the most memorable moment of this war in Madison? The defeat to Joe Frazier seemed, for many, to be the end of the legend. The invincible had fallen. Newspapers carried cruel headlines. Ali, no longer the greatest. Critics called him outdated, a man who couldn't bear the weight of his own arrogance. And indeed, Ali left Madison Square Garden with his body in pieces, his face swollen, his eyes half closed in pain, his jaw throbbing after 15 rounds of punishment. But those close to him that night swore that, even injured, Ali kept repeating in a low voice, "I'm still the greatest. You'll see." Backstage, as doctors iced his face, he refused to surrender to the silence of defeat. "I lost a fight, but I didn't lose my soul," he told a journalist who dared to ask if his time was up. Ali turned his own defeat into fuel. For him, each criticism was another reason to keep going. He knew the world would remember not just his victories, but how he reacted to his defeat. And that night, Ali began a new chapter in his own legend. The following weeks, while Frazier was celebrated as the undisputed champion, Ali began rebuilding his career. Harder training, rigorous diets, endless nights of preparation. His body was scarred, but his mind was sharper than ever. He knew he couldn't simply go back to being the same. He needed to evolve, to find a new version of himself. "I'm not just a boxer," he said in interviews. "I'm living proof that the human spirit can endure anything." The public, which had initially condemned him, began to see Ali differently. Seeing a man who had faced the government, lost everything, and yet returned to the ring against the world's most brutal champion was already extraordinary. The defeat against Frazier, rather than destroying his image, merely humanized it. Ali ceased to be an untouchable myth and became a real man, who fell, suffered, and still rose again. It was during this period that Ali began to plot his revenge against Frazier and, at the same time, envision an even greater foe, George Foreman. Foreman was young, indestructible, a monster who knocked down opponents like dolls. Meanwhile, Ali prepared in silence, accumulating smaller fights, testing strategies, fine-tuning his mind and body. Each victory after the fall was a clear message. He was back. In one of his most iconic statements, Ali said, "You think you knocked me down? I didn't fall, I just rested for a moment, because great people never stay down." These words were broadcast on newspapers, radio, and television. It was as if the whole world was learning that, for Ali, losing wasn't the end, it was just part of the journey. Deep down, the loss to Frazier had lit a flame brighter than any victory. He was no longer just the champion everyone expected to defeat. Now he was the survivor who inspired millions not to give up. His rebirth wouldn't happen overnight, but every workout, every interview, every sweat he shed in the gym was a step toward the inevitable, a return to glory. And as Ali prepared in silence, the world began to see something bigger. His next war would not be against just one man, but against the very idea of impossible. The gym lights shone down on Ali again, each bulb like a small sun exacting a toll for his fall. He ran all night, punched bags until his skin split, and silently listened to the voices telling him his legend was over. But in the ring, the conversation changed. Victory after victory, his breathing gained cadence, his body regained its memory, vanity gave way to hunger. Against old rivals and new hunters, Ali tested distance, time, and pride. In the locker room, he repeated almost in a whisper, "I'm back. I didn't come to survive, I came to rule." And each jab announced this to the audience, a sentence hammered into steel. He was repositioning the throne, piece by piece, without asking anyone's permission. On nights in a packed arena, he breathed boos and applause like the same gale. Quarry tasted the old steel. Foster learned that distance still lived in his skin. Ali was marked, but he spoke with the calm of someone gauging the tide. "You can't defeat time, you learn to surf on it," and he grew up. Then came the stumble that bit deep. Ken Norton. The hook went in sideways, ripped open the afternoon, and shattered his jaw as if it were thin glass. Ali didn't scream. He swallowed the pain, bound his pride, and walked to the locker room like a wounded king who accepts no witnesses. Inside, the silence smelled of ether. "I'll be back," he murmured, clutching the ice, unhurriedly, "and when I do, no one will recognize the man who comes out of that tunnel." In the following days, newspapers demanded a farewell. Critics pleaded for remembrance. Fans feared the worst. But Ali's body learned to communicate with the pain. He rewrote routines, stretched patience, repositioned his ego, and he discovered a precious detail. When the world weighs on the chest, breathing becomes music, not despair. In the mirror, he fixed less vanity, more calculation, less dancing, more angles. If youth was gasoline, now his brain would be the steering wheel. He trained like someone learning another language. Repetition, silence, correction, until the internal sound said advance again. The return against Norton was a rite of passage. He didn't seek blind revenge. He sought control. Jab after jab, he built distance and forced his rival to think, to hesitate, to breathe at his own pace. His knees bent slightly, his shoulders rotated like ancient hinges, and yet the math worked. When Norton tried to repeat the attack, he encountered a wall of air. Ali spun, pinned, clinched, whispered in his ear, "Not today, champ." With each pause, he took 2 short steps, as if marking invisible territory. The decision was close, but it came with something greater than numbers, the certainty that his jaw no longer ruled his destiny. At the hotel window, he laughed. "First debt paid," he whispered. "Now let's clean up the rest." And the rest had a name and a shadow. Joe Frazier again, a reunion without a belt, but with the same rage pent up in his body. Before the rematch, he trained short shadows. In the fight, he locked arms, tied rhythms, and bit into the space. When the final bell rang, the fire in his eyes returned. The rematch with Frazier set the city ablaze. There was no belt, there were old scores. He entered the match dryly and traded dance for command, closing spaces, striking from the inside, halting momentum with clinches and jabs that sealed the deal. When the decision came, he raised his fist, high, as if finishing a brutal workout. The message was clear. He could suffer, fall, and still dictate the plot. On the horizon, however, loomed George Foreman, a human thunderbolt. He had demolished champions, reducing giants to silence early. The press declared a crushing blow. Friends urged caution. Rivals gambled on the end. He listened and held on. In the gym, he leaned his back against the ropes, let the punch bag return blows, and studied the rebound. If the force comes like a tide, I'll turn to rock, he said. The plan seemed heretical, but it had music. Wear down the monster until his own weight betrayed him. And as he turned his body, a distant crowd began to chant his name from afar. Ali smiled and said, I am not afraid of the impossible. The impossible fears me when I arrive. Ali walked back to the center of the world with firm steps, no longer the boy who danced tirelessly, but the man who knew the price of every breath. After Norton and the rematch with Frazier, respect grew again like fire in dry grass. In the neighborhoods, boys imitated the shuffle. In the living rooms, old men remembered his former brilliance. On TVs, his voice ignited audiences. Ali spoke softly in the locker room. Losing didn't kill me, it taught me. Coaches adjusted the timer, ropes creaked. The bag responded with deep echoes. He tested distance, absorbed blows, saved vanity. I don't need to prove who I was, he told a reporter. I need to prove who I am now. The ring wasn't just work. It was an altar, and the world, attentive, realized that the flame that seemed weak could become a fire again. Between training sessions, Ali reconnected with the street, spoke of dignity, hugged people, and restored hope. When Foreman's name rang out in the distance, he said, I'll be ready. Culture also welcomed him. In universities, young people repeated phrases. In the streets, posters bore his face, and in simple homes, mothers cited his courage to calm fears. Ali understood that he had regained more than fighting. He had regained his place as a symbol. I speak for those who are not heard, he said on stage in a packed auditorium. He laughed, improvised, told stories, and went from the microphone straight to the heavy bag. The city became his training ground. At the same time, George Foreman's shadow grew like a storm. He swept away rivals in 2-3 rounds, leaving arms hanging like loose doors. Friends warned. He is brutal. Ali responded calmly. Life is brutal. I learned to stand. Then Africa called. Kinshasa ignited drums and promises. The continent wanted the duel, wanted to see the man who said no to war face the hammer of time. And Ali, upon hearing the invitation, closed his eyes and whispered, if the world turned me around, I give back hope. He left with faith and ready fists. The final adjustment of his rebirth came in silence. In training, Ali leaned his back against the ropes and learned to breathe like someone taming a wild animal. Each incoming blow was a clock ticking away patience. He leaned his torso, protected his ribs, threw short jabs, and whispered, spend your strength, giant. He learned to transform pain into waiting, waiting into opening, opening into clean strikes. In the early hours of the morning, he ran under unlit streetlights and repeated a mantra. To resist is to advance slowly. An assistant asked, what if he's stronger than you imagine? Ali smiled with cracked lips. His strength needs air. I take the air and let the mind work. Around him, African voices echoed a chant that would travel the planet. Ali felt the vibration seeping into his skin. It wasn't just sport. It was a meeting of history and courage, of fall and return. And in his gaze there was something tender, the certainty that his body might not be the same, but his spirit was whole, sharp, ready. This rebirth wasn't born of applause. It was born of defeat. There he relearned to listen to his own heart beating beneath the noise of the world. He understood that courage isn't a shout, it's continuity. And that respect isn't a gift, it's a daily construction. When he set his sights on the belt again, the planet no longer saw just a champion. It saw a mirror, a man who fell, bled, swallowed humiliation, and reinvented his own body to move forward. He looked into the camera and left a message that transcends time. If life knocks you down, get up anyway. Not in a hurry, but with purpose. And so the cycle closed. The exile became a beacon, the accused became a symbol, the vanquished became a lesson. The next step was set. In the African night, under the open sky, there would be another war. A war that would forever change the idea of the impossible. But before that, remember today's lesson. Those who are reborn don't seek a red carpet. They seek truth, discipline, and peace. And they walk. When the bell rings, remember, myth thrives on resistance.